Do you think Mr. Carney understands Quebec?
I think he does not give a damn.
Canada's strong. We can give ourselves far more than anyone can take away. We're building this great country. I just met with the Premier.
Canada is facing the most serious federal crisis in decades, with Quebec now openly declaring it is exploring a sovereignty referendum, and Alberta charging ahead with plans for a 2026 separation vote. The very foundation of the nation is cracking.
Albertans could vote on leaving Canada as soon as 2026. That is the update from Premier Danielle Smith after she met with Prime Minister Mark Carney and after hundreds rallied for Alberta independence.
This is no longer about scattered voices of discontent. It is structured, organized, and planned. While Ottawa remains paralyzed in vague promises and recycled slogans, two of Canada's most powerful provinces are quietly drafting their exits. Premier François Legault has dropped all pretense. He publicly declared that Quebec is now actively considering holding a new referendum on sovereignty. This isn't just political posturing, it's a parting speech dressed as a press conference. Years of feeling sidelined culturally, linguistically, and economically have boiled over into a concrete path towards separation. Quebec asked Ottawa to reduce the number of temporary immigrants by 50%. The federal government never responded.
Of course, we would like to have a part of that.
Legault wants Canada to renegotiate the free trade agreement with the United States. Opposition parties are calling on the Premier to protect Quebec's interests.
Tensions flared when Prime Minister Mark Carney hinted he may support a Supreme Court challenge against Bill 96, Quebec's law protecting the French language. Legault slammed him publicly, declaring that Carney doesn't care about Quebec. Quebec sees this as an attack on its core identity, and it's fighting back. Premier Danielle Smith has already prepared the legal groundwork for Alberta's separation. The threshold for a referendum petition has been drastically lowered to 177,000 signatures. The vote is planned for 2026.
None of us knows what the future holds should Ottawa, for whatever reason, continue to attack our province, as they have done over the last decade.
Alberta passed the Sovereignty Act, along with the DIY guide for breaking up with Canada, timelines, legislation, procedural frameworks. In Alberta, 65% of UCP voters now support independence. In Quebec, sovereignty support has surged from below 30% to nearly 40% in just weeks. On social media, discussions about joining the U.S. as the 51st or 52nd state are growing. Even if half-joking, it shows a profound collapse in faith in Ottawa. Mark Carney is being criticized for barely mentioning Quebec's key industries, aerospace, forestry, and fisheries. After Quebec helped the Liberal Party gain seats in 2021, it now feels completely ignored. Carney's reaction? Ambiguous statements and soft gestures, described by critics as a sleep-deprived intern drafting farewell speeches at midnight. No commitment, no firm response, just delay. When two of your largest provinces begin drafting divorce papers while the federal government clings to old slogans and vague hopes, the dream of a unified Canada is quickly slipping away. Quebec and Alberta are no longer mere rebels. They are now organized political machines with real public support and structured exit plans. If Ottawa doesn't wake up, if it doesn't take real, concrete action instead of reciting hollow lines, then Canada may soon be nothing more than the lonely name of a capital city, isolated on a map that is quietly being redrawn.
What if we don't get a deal with Trump by Friday? What else might Trump do if we don't reach a deal? Might he add additional tariffs to other sectors and other industries?
That's what prompted him saying, well, then you're not a real country. You're a 51st state. So now we have to act like a real country. And a real country can defend itself.
This is an insult, one furious premier declared after hearing the news of the latest US-EU trade agreement. Saskatchewan, Alberta, Ontario, once restrained in their criticism, are now united in frustration. They are no longer waiting for Ottawa's explanations. They want answers. They want action. They want to know, how did Canada, America's largest trading partner, get sidelined and treated like a second-tier country?
I got a problem with one person, and that's Donald Trump down there.
The premiers are no longer hiding their disappointment. They now openly criticize the federal government for being soft, slow, and completely reactive. Some are even questioning whether Ottawa still has the capacity to defend provincial interests on the global stage. As Canadian provinces struggle to rebuild from economic disruption, the U.S. has already sealed trade deals with Japan and the European Union. Both of those agreements include a 15% tariff rate on key sectors like automobiles, steel, and electronics, a major reduction compared to earlier terms.
Unfortunately, the sad reality is that tariffs mean the economy is going to work less efficiently. It means there's going to be less income. So there's going to be less consumption.
But Canada, still stuck in limbo, still facing threats of steep new tariffs. President Trump has made it clear, either Canada accepts the deal on my terms, or there will be no deal at all. And if there's no deal, Canada will pay the price. Back in Ottawa, the federal cabinet scrambles behind closed doors. But instead of solutions, they're asking each other questions. What if we don't get a deal? What will Trump do next? Will there be another round of tariffs? The optimism that once surrounded these talks has evaporated. Senior ministers now admit the U.S. isn't negotiating, they're dictating.
The Canadian delegation returns to Washington next week, even as there's little hope right now.
The country now faces an impossible choice: accept a humiliating trade deal or prepare for a full-scale economic assault from Washington. Trump is using his recent diplomatic wins, deals with Japan and the EU, as leverage against Canada. He's parading these victories to the world, saying, "I'm getting the job done, Canada's next." Even though Canada is the United States' single largest trading partner, it's being treated like an outsider. Now Trump wants Canada to accept the same flat 15% tariff template, regardless of previous treaties like USMCA.
U.S. President Donald Trump says most trade deals will be finished by August 1st. But as for us,
we haven't really had a lot of luck with Canada. I think Canada could be one where they'll just pay tariffs, not really a negotiation.
And if Canada refuses, tariffs could hit Canadian oil, autos, aluminum, lumber, and agriculture, crippling industries across the West and Heartland provinces. With tensions at a breaking point, all eyes turn to one final possibility: a direct call between Canada's Prime Minister and President Trump. Some insiders believe Trump still respects Mark Carney, Canada's lead negotiator, but that respect doesn't necessarily extend to the Prime Minister. If this conversation fails, Canada could be thrown into a trade war it never wanted and never prepared for. And the damage wouldn't be limited to the government. It would strike workers, businesses, and families across the country. Canada's premiers are livid, its people are worried, its leaders are scrambling. Meanwhile, the United States, once an ally, has become an enforcer, dictating Canada's future with every tariff threat. The question is no longer, how do we reach a deal? It's now, is Canada still a sovereign nation or just a dependent satellite orbiting Washington's will? One wrong move, one failed call, and the very idea of Canadian independence could slip into the past, remembered only as something we used to have.
U.S. President Donald Trump's trade deadline is just 3 days away. And while in Washington last week, Canada's negotiating team downplayed the likelihood of a deal by Friday. Today, though, Trump's Commerce Secretary says that deadline will not be delayed any further.
We're standing up for Canada, Canadian interests. Of course, the United States is looking out, the President's looking out for the interests of American workers. There is a landing zone that's possible, but we have to get there.
While the world watches as the United States signs major trade deals with Japan and the European Union, Canadians are left staring at a deafening silence from their own government. Ottawa has failed to secure a comparable agreement with its closest ally, while others race ahead. The cold shoulder from Washington has stung Canadians deeply, and in the western provinces, it sparked something more dangerous: a sense of abandonment. Across Alberta and Saskatchewan, people are asking a chilling question: has Ottawa stopped representing us altogether? Premier Danielle Smith of Alberta no longer hides her anger. We contribute tens of billions to Canada's economy every year, but when it comes to negotiating with the U.S., Ottawa hesitates. Japan and the EU got 15% tariffs on cars, and we're still waiting for a framework.
Well, look, I mean, tariffs are their own punishment. If you're mad at the other guy, you don't punch yourself in the face. That's what I look at tariffs.
Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe was even more blunt. If one day Americans ask, who's our real partner, Alberta or Ottawa, I think the answer is already obvious. Japan and the EU both secured import tariffs on automobiles reduced to just 15%. Meanwhile, Canada, a neighbor and historic ally, remains in limbo. President Trump flatly stated, "We haven't had much luck with Canada. Maybe it's better to just impose a tariff."
They're going to pay a tariff. I'm going to keep it minimal. I'm going to keep it, I'm not looking to hurt countries. I could do that too, but I'm not looking to do that.
That single comment sent shockwaves through Canada's auto industry. While others were securing access, Canada was stuck defending its existence at the table. This growing dissatisfaction has poured fuel onto the fire of separatist movements. Alberta recently passed legislation to lower the threshold for triggering referendums, allowing only 177,000 signatures instead of over 600,000. Though the provincial government hasn't officially endorsed secession, groups like the Alberta Prosperity Project claim to have already gathered over 250,000 signatures. In Saskatchewan, public unrest is building. While the premier has not committed to a referendum, pressure from citizens is mounting by the day. If Ottawa won't listen, one organizer said, we'll force the conversation.
Will happen whether the majority want it or not.
It's all right to vote.
Alberta and Saskatchewan send most of their exports not to Ontario or Quebec, but to U.S. states like Montana, Idaho, and Texas. Many farmers in Saskatchewan have been blunt. I sell to Americans. I don't see Ottawa buying anything from me. Ottawa's inability to secure new trade terms only reinforces the reality on the ground. These provinces are already economically tied to the U.S. Whether Ottawa acts or not, the West is drifting, and not quietly.
So Alberta historically has the highest levels of real GDP growth, highest levels of real GDP per person.
Analysts now warn that without a major shift in Ottawa's posture toward trade and provincial autonomy, the separation movements could become unstoppable. When citizens believe they've been betrayed, they'll choose their own path, one expert noted. A full separation of Alberta and Saskatchewan would cost the federal government at least $20 billion annually, and that's just the start. Such a move could send ripple effects across Manitoba, British Columbia, and the Northern Territories. Canada was once hailed as a nation of unity and quiet strength, but today its western provinces look southward, no longer east. Premiers voice frustration not behind closed doors, but in front of cameras. The public no longer whispers their doubts, they organize. What was once a federation of equal partners now feels like a federal shell centered on Ottawa. One day soon, Canadians may wake up and realize the country they knew is gone, and all that remains is a lonely capital surrounded by provinces that no longer call it home.
The big three automakers are not happy. They say a deal that charges lower tariffs on Japanese imports than on North American cars with high American content is a bad deal.
Trading problems between our nations, ideally by Labor Day.
He says it would be unreasonable for Canada to have an agreement that looks worse than the new U.S.-Japan deal that sees auto tariffs cut to 15% from 27.5%.
The United States has just signed a new trade agreement with Japan, slashing auto tariffs from 27.5% to 15%. On paper, it's a deal between Washington and Tokyo, but its impact has shaken Canada to the core. Why? Because every percentage point cut for Japan pushes Canadian-made cars further out of the U.S. market. Factories in Ontario are suddenly the expensive, less attractive choice. And yet, while Tokyo lobbied aggressively and secured this breakthrough, Ottawa stood still. Prime Minister Mark Carney keeps repeating promises of fair negotiations, but every day Canada's key industries are being squeezed harder, and people are losing patience. The numbers speak for themselves. With Japanese cars entering the U.S. at just 15% tariffs, Canadian exports are collapsing. In the second quarter of 2025 alone, auto exports to the U.S. dropped by over 30%. General Motors Canada reported a staggering 35% decline in quarterly profits, while Stellantis posted a $2.7 billion net loss in just the first half of the year.
Well, if we want to compare ourselves to Japan, Japan buys approximately $79 billion worth of products. Off of the U.S., we buy $359 billion, so we're 400% more, even higher than that, actually.
American lawmakers made it clear Japan earned its concessions through relentless diplomacy. Canada, meanwhile, didn't even make it to the negotiating table in time. Senior U.S. senators have openly said that Canada must prove it deserves equal treatment. For a country that once prided itself on being Washington's most trusted trade partner, this is a humiliation. Ontario Premier Doug Ford, whose province is home to Canada's largest auto manufacturing plants, didn't hold back. We can't sit here and watch factories slash jobs because our federal government failed to protect us. Why is Japan getting a better deal while we get ignored? This is a blatant diplomatic failure. Alberta's Danielle Smith echoed the anger. We talk about Buy Canada, but without real policies to protect our industries, that slogan means nothing.
We should never take a backseat to anyone in the world, especially a backseat to President Trump. We're an economic powerhouse around the world, and again, we're their number one customer, and they need to start respecting their number one customer.
They're taking matters into their own hands. Ford is urging provinces to prioritize Canadian-made vehicles and cut down on imported U.S. parts. Alberta is bypassing Ottawa entirely, opening direct talks with American companies to sell oil and energy components. The anger isn't confined to political leaders. A Nanos research survey shows 64% of Canadians believe Ottawa has failed to defend national interests in trade talks. Social media is exploding with the hashtag #BuyCanada, but the tone is bitter. We're buying Canadian cars, but is Ottawa doing anything to protect Canadian jobs?
In response to U.S. tariffs and President Trump's threats to annex Canada, 71% of Canadian consumers say they intend to buy fewer American products this year.
Dealers have reported a 12% jump in Canadian-made car sales in the past month as ordinary citizens try to support local industries. But it's a desperate move, not a solution. If manufacturers keep cutting production lines and laying off workers, no grassroots campaign can save the sector. Mark Carney's assurances of ongoing negotiations sound hollow when factories are already cutting shifts. Reports from Washington suggest Canada might be forced to accept a tariff deal even worse than Japan's if it doesn't act quickly.
We'll be reinforcing those discussions.